Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are going to get into a testament of hope, the speeches and writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let's see. Editor's introduction. Bear with me a moment. I gotta go through all the little Roman numeral pages on the editor's introduction. Okay, part 1. Philosophy. These are speeches and writings on philosophy of Dr. King. Religious nonviolence. The first section is nonviolence and racial justice. Something that's a big part of the marches today. This article appeared in Christian Century, the premier liberal Protestant journal, shortly after almost 100 black clergymen came to the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta in response to a call from the Reverends Fred Shuttlesworth, Charles K. Steele, and Dr. King. They met on the 10th and 11th of January 1957, formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and elected King as its first president. This article outlines King's hope that nonviolent direct action could become the philosophy around which committed Christians could rally in order to defeat the evil of segregation. With the encouragement and editorial assistance of two very important activist pacifists, the Reverend Glenn E. Smiley, National Field Secretary of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and Bayard Rustin, then Executive Secretary of the War Resisters League. King sought to use this philosophy through SCLC to focus and direct the new black struggle for equality. As the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, he argued that this tactic had been used successfully in MIA's nonviolent boycott against that city's bus company. After 381 days of the black boycott, the U.S. Supreme Court on the 13th of November 1956 affirmed the June 4th decision handed down by a panel of 3 judges on the U.S. District Court, who ruled against the local and state segregation laws of Alabama. It is commonly observed that the crisis of race relations dominates the arena of American life. This crisis has been precipitated by two factors: the determined resistance of reactionary elements in the South to the Supreme Court's momentous decision outlawing segregation in the public schools, and the radical change in the Negro's evaluation of himself. While Southern legislative halls ring with open defiance through interposition and nullification, while a modern version of the Ku Klux Klan has arisen in the form of respectable white citizens' councils, a revolutionary change has taken place in the Negro's conception of his own nature and destiny. Once he thought of himself as an inferior and patiently accepted injustice and exploitation. Those days are gone. The first Negroes landed on the shores of this nation in 1619, 1 year ahead of the Pilgrim Fathers. They were brought here from Africa, and, unlike the Pilgrims, they were brought against their will, as slaves. Throughout the era of slavery, the Negro was treated in an inhuman fashion. He was considered a thing to be used, not a person to be respected. He was merely a depersonalized cog in a vast plantation machine. The famous Dred Scott decision of 1857 well illustrates his status during slavery. In this decision, the Supreme Court of the United States said, in substance, that the Negro is not a citizen of the United States. He is merely property subject to the dictates of his owner. After his emancipation in 1863, the Negro still confronted suppression and inequality. It is true that for a time, while the army of occupation remained in the South and Reconstruction ruled, he had a brief period of eminence and political power. But he was quickly overwhelmed by the white majority. Then in 1896, through the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, a new kind of slavery came into being. In this decision, the Supreme Court of the nation established the doctrine of separate but equal as the law of the land. Very soon, it was discovered that the complete result of this doctrine was strict enforcement of separate, without the slightest intention to abide by the equal. So the Plessy doctrine ended up plunging the Negro into the abyss of exploitation, where he experienced the bleakness of nagging injustice. A peace that was no peace. Living under these conditions, many Negroes lost faith in themselves. They came to feel that perhaps they were less than human. So long as the Negro maintained his subservient attitude and accepted the place assigned him, a sort of racial peace existed. But it was an uneasy peace in which the Negro was forced patiently to submit to insult, injustice, and exploitation. It was a negative peace. True peace is not merely the absence of some negative force, tension, confusion, or war. It is the presence of some positive force, justice, goodwill, and brotherhood. Then circumstances made it necessary for the Negro to travel more. From the rural plantation, he migrated to the urban industrial community. His economic life began gradually to rise, his crippling illiteracy gradually to decline. A myriad of factors came together to cause the Negro to take a new look at himself. Individually and as a group, he began to reevaluate himself, and he came to feel that he was somebody. His religion revealed to him that God loves all his children, and that the important thing about a man is not his specificity, that his fundamentum, not the texture of his hair or the color of his skin, but the quality of his soul. This new self-respect and sense of dignity on the part of the Negro undermined the South's negative peace, since the white man refused to accept the change. The tension we are witnessing in race relations today can be explained in part by the revolutionary change in the Negro's evaluation of himself and his determination to struggle and sacrifice until the walls of segregation have been fully crushed by the battering ram of justice. Quest for freedom everywhere. The determination of Negro Americans to win freedom from every form of oppression springs from the same profound longing for freedom that motivates oppressed peoples all over the world. That dynamic beat the deep discontent in Africa and Asia is at bottom a quest for freedom and human dignity on the part of people who have long been victims of colonialism. The struggle for freedom on the part of oppressed people in general and the American Negro in particular has developed slowly and is not going to end suddenly. Privileged groups rarely give up their privileges without strong resistance. But when oppressed people rise up against suppression or oppression, there is no stopping point short of full freedom. Realism compels us to admit that the struggle will continue until freedom is a reality for all the oppressed peoples of the world. Hence, the basic question which confronts the world's oppressed is: how is the struggle against the forces of injustice to be waged? There are two possible answers. One is resort to the all too prevalent method of physical violence and corroding hatred. The danger of this method is its futility. Violence solves no social problems. It merely creates new and more complicated ones. Though vistas of time, through the vistas of time, a voice still cries to every potential Peter, put up your sword. The shores of history are white with the bleached bones of nations and communities that failed to follow this command. If the American Negro and other victims of oppression succumb to the temptation of using violence in the struggle for justice, unborn generations will live in a desolate night of bitterness, and their chief legacy will be an endless feign of chaos. Alternative to violence. The alternative to violence is nonviolent resistance. This method was made famous in our generation by Mahatma, Mohandas K. Gandhi, who used it to free India from the domination of the British Empire. 5 points can be made concerning nonviolence as a method in bringing about better racial conditions. First, this is not a method for cowards. It does resist. The nonviolent resistor is just as strongly oppressed as the evil against opposed to the evil against which he protests, as is the person who uses violence. His method is passive or non aggressive in the sense that he is not physically aggressive toward his opponent, but his mind and emotions are always active, constantly seeking to persuade the opponent that he is mistaken. This method is passive physically, but strongly active spiritually. It is non-aggressive physically, but dynamically aggressive spiritually. The second point is that nonviolent resistance does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win his friendship and understanding. The nonviolent resistor must often express his protest through non-cooperation or boycotts. But he realizes that non-cooperation and boycotts are not ends themselves. They are merely means to awaken a sense of moral shame in the opponent. The end is redemption and reconciliation. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. A third characteristic of this method is that the attack is directed against forces of evil rather than against persons who are caught in those forces. It is evil we are seeking to defeat, not the persons victimized by evil. Those of us who struggle against racial injustice must come to see that the basic tensions is not between races. As I like to say to the people in Montgomery, Alabama, the tension in this city is not between white people and Negro people. The tension is at bottom between justice and injustice, between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. And if there is a victory, it will be a victory not merely for 50,000 Negroes, but a victory for justice and the forces of light. We are out to defeat injustice and not white persons who may happen to be unjust. A fourth point that must be brought out concerning nonviolent resistance is that it avoids not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of spirit. At the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. In struggling for human dignity, the oppressed people of the world must not allow themselves to become bitter or indulge in hate campaigns. To retaliate with hate and bitterness would do nothing but intensify the hate in the world. Along the way of life, someone must have sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate. This can be done only by projecting the ethics of love to the center of our lives. The meaning of love. In speaking of love at this point, we are not referring to some sentimental emotion. It would be nonsense to urge men to love their oppressors in an affectionate sense. Love, in this connection, means understanding goodwill. There are three words for love in the Greek New Testament. First, there is eros. In Platonic philosophy, eros meant the yearning of the soul for the realm of the divine. It has come now to mean a sort of aesthetic or romantic love. Second, there is philia. It meant intimate affectionateness between friends. Philia denotes a sort of reciprocal love. The person loves because he is loved. When we speak of loving those who oppose us, we refer to neither eros or philia. We speak of a love which is expressed in the Greek word agape. Agape means nothing sentimental or basically affectionate. It means understanding, redeeming goodwill for all men, and overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. When we love on the agape level, we love men not because we like them, not because their attitudes and ways appeal to us, but because God loves them. Here we rise to the position of loving the person who does the evil deed while hating the deed he does. Finally, the method of nonviolence is based on the conviction that the universe is on the side of justice. It is this deep faith in the future that causes the nonviolent resistor to accept suffering without retaliation. He knows that in his struggle for justice, he has cosmic companionship. This belief that God is on the side of truth and justice comes down to us from the long tradition of our Christian faith. There is something at the very center of our faith which reminds us that Good Friday may reign for a day, but ultimately it must give way to the triumphant beat of Easter drums. Evil may so shape events that Caesar will occupy a palace and Christ a cross. But one day, that same Christ will rise up and split history into AD and BC, so that even the life of Caesar must be dated by his name. So in Montgomery, we can walk and never get weary, because we know that these will be a great camp meeting to the promised land of freedom and justice. This, in brief, is the method of nonviolent resistance. It is a method that challenges all people struggling for justice and freedom. God grant that we wage the struggle with dignity and discipline. May all who suffer oppression in this world reject the self-defeating method of retaliatory violence and choose the method that seeks to redeem. Through using this method wisely and courageously, we will emerge from the bleak and desolate midnight of man's inhumanity to man the bright daybreak of freedom and justice. So yeah, a long first entry, but it is an article Dr. King wrote that appeared in the magazine Christian Century. um, issue 74 on the 6th of February 1957, and pages 165 to 167. But essentially, he sets forth the idea of nonviolent resistance. And he mentions it is an idea he got through the resistance of Mohandas Gandhi in their attempt to free India from British control. And it's an ideal usage. Unfortunately, today there are the sides that we try to use non-violence resistance against the evil. Some people will do what they can to make non-violence into violence or seem like violence. The protest against the police that had been going on here in all of June saw the police even stack up in different cities. This was found stacks of bricks specifically because they wanted the protesters to start rioting and breaking windows and have so they would have an excuse. There are more challenges now than what Dr. King faced. So those who are confronted with nonviolent resistance have weapons they use against nonviolence, have strategies they use against nonviolence. But anyway, I feel it's still important to follow Dr. King's model of nonviolence. But as always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. If anyone tries to tell you something that you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.